Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Stonebelt's webinar, Building Relationships Through Mutual Connection with Non-Speaking Individuals. I also want to welcome our guest speaker today, Kim Hurley. You will learn more about her here in a moment. First, I want to share with you a little bit about Stonebelt. So I am your host, Reverend Sarah McKenney, the spiritual support and volunteer coordinator for Stonebelt. For those of you who don't know about Stonebelt, we are a service provider that offers a wide range of support services for people with intellectual and or developmental disabilities, as well as neurodivergent folks. We are located in Bloomington, Bedford, and Columbus, Indiana, and we are a secular organization. Therefore, we strive to offer support to people of any and all faith or spiritual practices. We're also a community-based organization. So this means that we promote full integration and inclusion and belonging of people in their community as much as possible. Now, before we dive in, I want to bring your attention to a few more things. Please notice the donation site at the bottom of your screen. I will also put it in the chat box here in a few minutes. We are offering our webinars for free, but we want to be able to bring you quality speakers. So we ask you to consider making a donation. This is our remaining webinar schedule for 2021. All webinars will be recorded and archived on our website. So feel free to go back and share this webinar with others. On our webpage, you will also find some free resources, book suggestions, previous webinars, and this is a new page and a growing page, so please feel free to check back often. If you are in our service area, you can also check out the other services that I, the spiritual support coordinator, can provide you and your congregation, such as congregational trainings, consultation. If you are outside our service area, feel free to email me anyway, and I can try and assist you or direct you to supports in your area, or maybe answer some of your questions. There will be a question and answer time at the end of this presentation. So feel free to type in your Q&A, your questions at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A, but we'll also try and be answering your questions throughout as much as possible. So whether you want to hold on to your question at the end, or especially if it's a question about a term that we're using, or something that we've just said, feel free to enter your questions in that box, and we'll try and get those, address those questions. I also want to say, please use the chat box. Enter in your name, where you're from, what you do. This is a great way to get to know each other, and to use each other as resources as well. So please feel free to use that chat box, and yeah, say a little bit about yourself, maybe an email if you're comfortable, or why you're here, anything that you might want to put out there for others to know. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Kim Hurley, who's actually one of Stonebelt's board members. Kim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. I am a speech and language pathologist. I work for the Forest Hills Special Education Cooperative, which serves public schools in Ellettsville and Spencer, Indiana. That is about an hour southwest of Indianapolis. I've been doing my job for 20 years, and I do specialize in students who have intellectual disabilities, complex communication disorders, and those sorts of things. I am a member of the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association and the Special Interest Group 12, which is AAC. And as you said, I'm a member of the Stone Belt Board, and I'm also a member of Trinity Episcopal Church here in Bloomington.
Thank you very much, Kim. I kind of already introduced myself. Usually I stay as the host, but today I will be offering a little bit today. So I thought I'd share a little bit more about who is adding to this presentation. Like I said, I'm the spiritual support coordinator for Stone Belt. And I'm also the chair of Presbyterians for Disability Concerns. That is the disability committee within the Presbyterian Church USA. I'm also the vice president of a board of the board of directors for Fallen Walls Ministry, which is a ministry that supports people with disabilities who are in ministerial leadership. Like I said, I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, received my Master's of Divinity at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I'm currently working on my doctorate of ministry in disability and ministry studies at Western Theological Seminary. And I live my life through the lens of dyslexia, so I'm also bringing that with me today.
So our course objectives, this is very much my professional hat here. When we do seminar or webinars, I always have objectives. I would really like for all the attendees to come out having some confidence, understanding some of the myths about being non-speaking in relation to communication and spirituality, some knowledge about helpful strategies for non-speaking people, and some insight into how we can leave behind some of our ableist expectations and present ourselves and tune into the other individual regardless of their ability to communicate. This is a really powerful quote. The silence of speechlessness is never golden. We all need to communicate and connect with each other, not just in one way, but in as many ways as possible. It's a basic human need, a basic human right, and more than that, it's a basic human power. And that was something that's shared in my groups of AAC or augmentative communication groups a lot, but I think it speaks to more than just my professional lens, and it does speak to all of us really understanding that speechlessness is not something we really strive for. So what do we mean when we say someone is non-speaking? It's not the same as saying nonverbal or lacking in symbolic thought. A non-speaking person is simply not able to use spoken language or speech effectively to communicate their ideas. Non-speaking people aren't necessarily quiet. They can be very loud. They can make a lot of vocalizations, or they might use word approximations, or they may even use what we call scripts, lines, just strictly memorized lines that for them are communicative, but for us may not make any sense. They may also use gestures, sign language, facial expressions, body positioning, or some sort of augmentative or alternative communication device, such as a picture board, an iPad that has voice output on it, or some sort of little computer device that has speech on it for them. Nonverbal doesn't mean I have nothing to say. It simply means you have to listen with more than just your ears. And again, this uses the term nonverbal, but I apply that to non-speaking students as well. We really do have to change our lens to really understand people who aren't using speech. So who can be non-speaking? Individuals who've had a stroke or aphasia have lost the ability to use speech at times. Individuals with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, And those can include things like Down syndrome, Angelman syndrome, chromosomal deletions, autistic individuals, individuals with cerebral palsy or other motor disabilities, and also individuals with trauma who may choose not to speak or who are so traumatized that speech becomes ineffective for them. For all of these individuals, a foundational principle is to presume potential. That means we assume or presume that everyone has something to say, and that we make the least dangerous assumption by assuming that the individual can understand us. We are age respectful for that individual. We speak directly to the individual and not to a caretaker or somebody with them or around them. And that we recognize that individual's behaviors that we might find awkward or uncomfortable are often serving a purpose for that individual, whether that is a sensory purpose, a regulatory purpose, or some sort of expression that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe their expression of joy is to jump up and down and flap, and that makes us uncomfortable because it draws attention to us, but that individual is expressing pure, unadulterated joy. The goal is that we are all one body. We want to welcome the stranger. We welcome the stranger in all three of the monotheistic traditions and more. So in Islam, in Judaism, in Christianity, the idea of welcoming the stranger is a foundational principle in that theology. The Creator created each of us with gifts and with limitations, and we are created to need one another, which requires us to be in community with one another. And that is the essence of true inclusion. This is a visual that I use to explain the idea of inclusion. And you see 4 little dot graphics. The first one is exclusion, and you have several red, gray, and yellow dots around the outside of the circle, and inside the circle are lots and lots of little blue dots, and those yellow, red, and gray dots are clearly excluded. Segregation, where we have 2 circles, a small circle with yellow, red, and gray, and a bigger circle with all the blue. Integration, which puts that circle of yellow, red, and or the yellow, gray, and red inside the big circle of blue, but they're still kind of in their own little group. And then inclusion, where those dots are kind of mixed in, all the different colors together. And that's where we kind of need to be moving ourselves. And there's actually a step further that Sarah has talked about, which is true belonging, where we can't really see the blue dots without seeing the red and yellow and gray dots, because they all need to be together. Inclusion is a step in belonging. It includes things like engagement, sharing, and connection. This word cloud has a lot of different words that come up when we think of the word inclusion, and somebody compiled all of these into a word cloud. And it's a really powerful way to think about how do we think about inclusion. But these are all human values. These are all part of that parity of experience or social equality, that we need to be part of each other. This is a really, really powerful quote as well. Communication is the essence of human life. Communication is about touching other people and about having our lives touched by others. Nowhere in that quote do they talk about words or speech, simply about communication. And I think that's an important thing to keep our minds grounded in. So how do we communicate with non-speaking people? We do what we know, but maybe just a little bit differently. And that means you're not really doing anything different except maybe not relying on words. From a religious standpoint, that can look like spiritual or pastoral listening. It's also important that we expect the unexpected, that sometimes we assume words are going to be what carries that conversation, when instead it's something far different and maybe far more meaningful. We engage presence. A quote from Erna Allant, who was a professor here at IU and has retired: communication is not a means to an end, but a process that allows people to gain and deepen their understanding of each other. And again, we remind ourselves that's not speech, that's communication. So when we share experiences, how do we do that with a non-speaking person? Well, we don't expect that non-speaking person to show us how to do it. That's not fair to them. We have to be humble. We have to kind of follow their lead, get into their experience a little bit, really kind of show them we want to connect with them. Be under the table with them. And I have this little graphic. This relates to a story that I really do. I have a classroom that loves to make fun of me because they will often find me doing things like sitting under a desk with a student. I'm not afraid to get down with whatever my students are doing and to do that with them, to engage with them. And I find that that is the best way for them to engage with me. And that's that kind of shared experience. I don't presume that they need to sit up in the chair to be with me. I take away that assumption and I say, why can't I be under the table with them? Maybe that's where we both need to be. Pausing is important, giving space and time to that activity. Thanks. Waiting for an invitation to respond. That's okay, Sarah, it happens to me too. Using that time. Our friends with intellectual and developmental disabilities need extra time to process thought, but also sometimes extra time to gather the energy to put together however they're going to communicate their message. Their bodies may not work the same as ours. It may take them longer, even just to get the energy together to make a sound. It may take a lot of cognitive time and physical time to activate all those neurons to get that going. So we need to slow down and really wait for them to engage with us so that we can engage back with them. So I do this all the time. You see that I use a lot of visuals and pictures. Using multisensory experiences is one way to really share connection without words. A lot of those in our religious experiences are already built in. We have music. Some experiences have incense, colorful vestments, liturgical colors. All of those are really nice ways of integrating our senses into that experience. And we need to remember that those are also ways to help engage other people. We can expand that idea across activities. So using those colors or senses or things to engage with another individual, allowing them to, maybe touch a vestment to kind of get a sense of how that texture and how that color interacts with their fingers might be a really meaningful way for that individual to experience what we want to share with them. I really enjoyed Sarah's previous webinar on creative strategies for digital worship. And in that webinar, if you go back and take a look at that, there are tons of really amazing ideas for using multisensory experiences in worship, and ways that don't necessarily require communicating or speaking to experience these things. We also have to allow all of the people involved, not just the individuals with intellectual disabilities, not just the non-speaking individuals, but everybody to respond with multisensory options. So maybe in our conversation, we use a lot of pictures and we allow everyone to kind of communicate with photographs or pictures on their phones and allow that to be kind of a way to unite without having to speak. We all share our favorite picture, or we share a picture that means something to us. So here are some more traditional types of multisensory response modes. There is a formal product called talking mats that you can kind of make for yourself if you want. Across the top, you have 3 options, and it can be anything from I love it, I'm not sure, I hate it, to whatever you want to do. And then you kind of just sort pictures within those areas. And you allow people to kind of express their ideas by moving those pictures around. That's a tool that you can purchase, but you can also do really simple things like draw pictures, act it out, use pictures on your phone, do a Google search for pictures, or go out and take pictures on your phone. I can't tell you how many times some of my students who really can't share a story with me are more than happy to pull up an iPad and show me a picture that they've taken. And that really is meaningful. And that's a way for them to share something with me. Also, sign language. A lot of people integrate sign language, and that is something that you can do, you can experience, and you can share those signs and help people kind of use that or some sort of gestural sharing to include in that way of experiencing communication.
So this might look familiar to you all. I think at some point, many of us learned or have at least heard the term active listening, especially for those of you out there who are in a profession where you're active listening, where you're listening and trying to tune into the other individual. So there are these 6 key active listening skills that we might be aware of: paying attention to the other person, not just listening, but watching their body language. Withholding your own judgment as you enter into that conversation, trying to tune into what they are saying versus focusing on your reaction or your judgment of what they are saying or not saying or doing. Then reflecting. So reflecting on what has just happened, and then sometimes there's like clarifying. If you're speaking, sometimes you're repeating what the other person said. If you're not speaking, you might act it out in response, just to make sure that your understanding is the same as what the other person's trying to communicate, and you continue to share that and exchange that back and forth. So the goal is to kind of take this all a little step further. So as you enter into this experience with the other person, you are really trying to shed, especially, this is good for anyone, but especially when entering into a moment with a non-speaking person, the goal is to shed expectations, whatever your personal expectations are of that conversation, of what's going to happen, societal expectations, the speed in which your time with that person, how fast or slow that's going to take, the topic, what you intend maybe to engage about might be different. So shedding those expectations and just being as present as possible with the other person. Observing and letting the other person take the lead. So you reminding yourself that you're not necessarily there to teach, but actually there to learn, and to let the other person take the lead and show you how they experience the world or what that person has to communicate to you. And that takes a sense of being humble and being open with the other person. Knowing that you have something to learn. You may be wrong. You might think that a person is trying to communicate one thing, but you later find out, oh, no, they weren't. That's okay. Good effort, good try. You keep trying and being humble to know that you are there to learn and learn something from that other individual. The goal also is to take this moment, this experience, this time with the other person, and move from an objective, so observing the other, and entering into a subjective interaction or relationship. So you are trying to enter into the experience with the other person. That's going to help get you closer to understanding the other individual as much as possible. Self-awareness, so being aware of your own reactions for for people who have like done CPE or maybe have been clinically trained, this also is probably going to be familiar. Being aware of your own reactions when things come up in you as you are with the other person. So like Kim was saying, maybe a sense of discomfort, or this doesn't feel right, this is weird. Name that, recognize it. This is weird. This is weird for me. This is new for me. This might be a little uncomfortable. Recognize it. And then maybe explore that as to what happened a little later, as much as possible. That way you're staying present, and then you're kind of working on why was that uncomfortable for me later, and you can still stay in tune with the other person. So there's being slow and intentional. The goal is to not race through this moment, being present, staying in tune with what this moment has to offer. And John Swinton, in Becoming Friends with Time, talks about the Christian prophet Jesus, which actually many prophets really enacted and embodied this, which is the being that this, he talks about the 3 mile an hour Jesus, meaning not fast, not fast paced, wasn't focused on where he needs to be next or how fast this needs to be, but where he needs to be in that moment. So if that means somebody stopped him and needed to talk to him, then that's where he needed to be in that moment. If it took more time to, and that person needed him more, then that's okay. He was there and was willing to take as much time that time and space needed. So everything that we talked about today, I'm going to try and describe this in a story the best way that I know how. This is a story about a woman named Linda. This is not her real name. I will say before I tell this story, I do not speak for Linda. This is my experience. And my understanding of this experience with this wonderful woman. And so hopefully this story helps to put some of what Kim and I have talked about into a narrative as an example. So as I said, my story is my experience, and it's with a woman named Linda, and I do not speak for her. Linda does not use words to communicate, and she does not have an auditory experience of the world, meaning she is deaf. However, she does feel, and she feels with her fingers, her hands, her whole body. She feels the world. Linda cannot use words to speak, nor can she respond to spoken or written word. Many have asked the questions of whether or not does she know God. When I first met Linda, at her home, I was there to do a spiritual support assessment. This is added to her individualized support plan that her support team followed to ensure quality care based on Linda's wants and needs. Staff told me Linda enjoys grass and being in a body of water so much that she could spend hours immersed in that sensory experience. So while I spent time with Linda, I wanted to observe her in this special space and experience. We first went out. We went out in her grassy yard, and I sat approximately 4 to 6 feet away, visually observed her. At first, I didn't engage verbally, of course, she is deaf, but I waved to her to communicate that I was entering into her space, her yard, and her activity that I am told she enjoys so much. I hesitated before I sat down, while watching for any sign of discomfort or disapproval of my presence. In doing so, I was asking her permission to enter into this space and observe her. She paused to watch what I was doing and where I was going, then directed her attention back to the grass. I watched as she lay down on her back, rolled side to side, then onto her belly and back to her side again. Her head relaxed as she examined the blades up close with fascination. She placed her hands on the tips of the grass, open palm, and carefully ran her hand side to side. Throughout all of this, she smiled, laughed, and rocked her body with pleasure. This observation was so pleasing to watch. I was clearly observing someone expressing joy and pleasure in this sensory-filled activity. But there was something I didn't quite understand. Why was this such a special activity for her? What is it? Was it only about a sensory experience, or is there something else going on, or something about the sensory experience that was so profound? What does this pleasure and joy mean to her? Where does this satisfaction come from? I might not be able to answer any of these questions, but I want to come closer to understanding, as this is clearly important to her. I didn't want my own perceptions to contradict what was really happening. So while I was observing Linda, I was able to gather some information, but it was filtered through my own experience. My observations in this way can only be my perception and not experienced, and not me experiencing it as well. Disconnected versus connected, subjective versus objective. At this point, I stopped observing Linda from afar. The goal with pastoral listening, The goal of pastoral listening is to move from a past and distant and separated perception of the other and attempt to enter into the other person's perception and embodied experience of the world. To do this, a person must participate with the entire body and mutually share in the experience with the other as much as possible. While, of course, I will never fully understand, it is in this space and experience that a person can move away from perception and closer to understanding. At first, I remained a 4 to 6 distance from her and just mimicked her movements with interest. She soon took notice of what I was doing and approached me. She took my hands and showed me how to tickle my hand on the tips of the grass. She would then look into my face and gather my reaction from this experience, smiling from her own pleasure of this interaction. After I laughed because it did in fact tickle, she took my hands in her own and showed me how to pound on the ground. She seemed to emphasize the difference between the solid sturdiness of the earth and the light tickling of the grass. She went back and forth between these two actions, all while watching my face for affirmation. She continued to laugh, smile, and rock back and forth. I continued to affirm what she was showing me, what I thought she was communicating to me through her smile, laughter, and and the rocking and the touching of the grass. Laughing with my own pleasure, I returned the eye contact that she offered me. I found myself enjoying this interaction with the grass and earth and our shared experience. I found myself genuinely filled with joy, pleasure, and a sense of silliness. These emotions seemed to pass back and forth between us as we interacted and responded to each other. And our connection seemed to grow as we spent more time together. At one point, Linda laid down on her side and lifted her head, seemingly to communicate that she was waiting for me to follow. So I responded by laying down on my side, but facing her. She then relaxed her head, and I relaxed mine. She then smiled, and I smiled. We were looking at each other through a forest of blades of grass. She was breathing slowly, calmly, and with a slight grin on her face, just watching me. My own breathing slowed. I felt calm. I noticed a slight grin on my face, and I was mesmerized by this amazing woman in front of me. This moment emoted beauty, peace, and the sacred. By fully engaging with Linda, I no longer saw this experience as simply two-dimensional or minimized or a minimized sensory play experience, but instead a truly engaging way of interacting with the world. Linda taught me that connecting to her is about what connecting with her is about. And through this experience, I was taught a form of worship that does not require words or an intellectual explanation. Linda physically guided me into her experience that broke my own political, social, spiritual expectations and competing agendas. She helped me learn through a mutually connective and transformative experience. Now, this is a moment and a time that I hold very, very special to me, as I really was profoundly changed in this experience with Linda. I do want to, though, point out some cautions, because like I said before, I do not speak for Linda. So I do want to, as we leave here and hopefully enter into wonderful experiences with other people, I want to, especially non-speaking individuals, I want to draw our attention to some areas to just be aware, so that that experience can be as truthful and respectful of one another as possible. Like I said, we are, please be humble and do not speak for the individual. When I tell this story, I am careful to say how I was affected, my emotions, the actual actions, the concrete touch, and what I learned. Her intentions may not be the same as what I learned. So keeping that in mind is important, and using your interpretations carefully and humbly.
We also need to, in general, keep in mind some cautions, such as be careful not to make the individual into an idol. A lot of times we will see a lot of what is called disability porn or inspiration porn, where the poor disabled person is somehow elevated into something more special because they are disabled. We need to be careful and remind ourselves that these are human beings, and that's it. We stop there. we need to remind ourselves to allow a lot of wait time. As I said, processing time may be slower. The time it takes for that person to really feel even comfortable wanting to choose a response might be slower. And it's really important to honor that time. I follow a young woman who has cerebral palsy who recently posted on Facebook about how angry she gets, that she has to wait for someone to finish talking to her before she can say something, but they're unwilling to wait for her to formulate her message on her communication device before they start talking again. And I can really feel that that must be frustrating. We also want to remember about scripts, that sometimes what sounds like a sentence or a meaningful expression isn't meant to be used literally. That person may remember a line from a Winnie the Pooh story and associate it not with the event in the movie, but with how they were feeling at that moment. And so that script, even though it may say one thing, may be invoking in them something completely different.
Can you give us an example of what that is, Kim?
Sure. So Tiggers love to bounce. Perhaps a child may be watching Winnie the Pooh and listening to Tigger say, Tiggers love to bounce. And while the child is doing that, they're sitting embraced in their mama's arms. They're warm and they're comfortable. And so they associate that phrase, Tiggers love to bounce, with being warm and comfy with mom. And so they'll say that phrase when they're in the bathtub. Tiggers love to bounce. And mom goes, no, 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 don't bounce in the bathtub. You'll slip and fall. Or they might say that when they're running outside across the street. Tiggers love to bounce. And mom will go, no, 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 no. You know, don't run across the street like that. They're not meaning it that. They're meaning I'm feeling warm. I'm feeling safe. I'm feeling comfortable. Also, every interaction won't be earth-shattering. Let's face it. Sometimes it's not going to work. Sometimes you're going to fail. Sometimes the person's going to look at you like, yeah, and and you just have to let that go. You have to just know that not every time that you engage with someone is going to be an earth-shattering experience. Certainly not every time that I engage with my husband is an earth-shattering experience. Sometimes it's, what do you want for dinner? You know, I mean, and that's real life. Again, going back to that, we're not talking about idols or somebody who's inherently different from us. Go back to that. It's just every day.
And there's an immense amount of trust that can be then grown when somebody says, is saying, no, go away, or communicating that in some way, shutting you out, looking in the other direction, communicating to you in some way that they're not down for engagement right now, and being able to not push that can grow an immense amount of trust of, oh, okay, you're not pushing me, you're now respecting that wish. And so though that can be just as an important of a conversation, so to speak, as anything else. Before we move to questions, I want to leave you just with some wondering questions that we are not going to answer, and nor do I have the answers to. But I do think that this conversation today then can lead to some important questions that are good for all of us to ponder. So one of the questions is, does God exist? If you believe in God, does God exist without words? How does one know or experience God? And is there a difference between the two? Is there a difference between knowing and experiencing? And does having a relationship with God require an intellectual ability of some sort? So now I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open us for anybody who has questions. I should have planned some questions.
Please feel free to ask anything specific about, especially my area. I told Sarah when we started this is completely out of my comfort zone. I am an educator, a speech pathologist. I do what I do. I know what I know. And so I don't know what you don't know or what you might have wondered about that I didn't explain well. So please feel free to drop a question in the chat or to raise your hand or something so that we can kind of get to that.
Marcus, welcome, Marcus. Good to see you on here. Marcus says, not a fully formed thought, but as a leader, I feel like I can learn how to better engage with non-speaking individuals because I want to. And first of all, that's the first thing is the desire. But do you have tips on how to teach pastoral listening and slowness to members of my group so that I can offer a welcoming community? There are some like great group exercises that you can do. So like team exercises where you could easily pair people off. And the goal is to you can either have a speaking conversation or not, and practice tuning into having people after the conversation. So two people have a conversation, say 5 minutes or 2 minutes. And then after you have had a conversation, people can write down what kind of dialogue was going on in their own head. Were they thinking about what they were going to say next? Were they thinking about, oh, I disagree with that person already? Stuff like that. And then I will also say I'm more than happy because I know that you are local. I'm more than happy, Marcus, to do some of these exercises and to plan some of these exercises for that group. So let me know. Evelyn says lots to process. All right. Wanda, what are some of your experiences you approached persons about God? So I guess my question is what do you mean by that? Is it me specifically asking a question about what do you believe in God? What do you mean by that? Because sometimes it's not always an intellectual type of conversation of saying, do you believe in God? Sometimes it is, because remember what Kim said, a person may have plenty of intellectual ability. It's the communication that is the barrier. So, I mean, you can just ask questions and see what the person might communicate back to you, especially using pictures or examples. Kim, do you have any other specific in the moment recommendations?
Not really. Yeah, just kind of being open and no.
I think we oftentimes, when we talk about God or talk about having a relationship with God, we want to define it with words versus how we experience God, which is kind of why I asked the question, what's the difference between knowing and experiencing? Because sometimes there's not words in how we experience God or any type of spirituality. Sometimes words isn't the best way to describe it, but love, connection, the joy, those are the types of things that might be that you might learn about a person. So often, Patricia says, so often caregivers and parents jump into the interaction. How do you manage this situation?
So, Patricia, what I typically do is look directly at the individual, not at the caregiver. and direct my questions to them. And when that caregiver jumps in, sometimes I can just use body language to make it pretty apparent. Thank you for your input, but I want to know what this person is thinking. And sometimes, especially with parents, it's really tricky. Sometimes with parents, I'll just say, I really appreciate, your child really well, and I really value your input. And I'd also like to see how your child can respond to me as well. I have the advantage of coming from an educational background where I can say, I need to know this because in school, you're not going to be there. But, just that kind of gently saying, your input is valuable. So your input is valuable, but I also would like to hear how your child says it, or your person says it.
Sometimes I'll also answer that question. So sometimes I will just, if it's really difficult for the other person, I'll just ask that I spend some time on my own with that person, to try and really have that time to ourselves, because even if the intention is good, they're trying to translate or communicate for their loved one or the person that they're supporting. But so sometimes just saying, hey, I'd love to spend some time on our own. We'll be okay. Like I'll come out if I need your help. Are there any books and other media you'd recommend by non-speaking individuals for further learning? Caleb, I'm going to write down your name, and I don't, but I will do some research and get back to you. Evelyn talked about the script as being a helpful point. One phrase that I hear often is "I'm sorry." One of the easiest things to say is "That's okay. This is not a problem." But the "I'm sorry" continues. I think this may be one where I need to slow down. Do either of you encounter this phrase used repeatedly with certain individuals? I do.
All the time, all the time, all the time.
And sometimes "I'm sorry" just means I feel bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I think individuals will know, it's a pragmatic skill, that they know they need to say something because you've said something, but they don't know what to say. And so "I'm sorry" just fits. They know that that is something they can use from their mouth to stick into that response, or use from their device or whatever to stick in that response. They know they need to respond, but they don't really have the words to respond. So yeah, it's very important, I think, to take a step back in those situations where it's clearly scripted and kind of think about what could that mean in that particular conversation.
Absolutely. We do have a few more minutes. I'm also looking on chat to see if we have anything in there. The webinar, I can't see who it's from. Jean, maybe, Jean Davies. Yes, so the digital worship webinar is on our website. And I just realized I did not record this. Technical issue of I did not press recording until recently. So what I will try and do is maybe see if Kim and I can get on again and try and record a copy of this. And we will find a way to get it up online so that you can watch it. Technical difficulties.
All right, Doreen just popped in a question. Do you model the patients with others? How do you best communicate the patients with others? Yes, I model patients with everyone. And Doreen knows me, so she knows this. This is kind of a leading question. Thank you, Doreen. But it's often, I think, important. I sometimes will actually use a gesture like we need to wait, and just hold my hand up. I'm waiting, or we need to wait. Sometimes I will, make it clear that I want that person. And so I will just expectantly pause and wait for the individual. Not in a way that says you need to respond right away. I'm waiting for you to say something, you have to, not in an obligatory way, but simply, I want to know more. That kind of, can you tell me more? And doing that in the presence of other people so that they understand that I'm giving this person the space that they need to respond or not respond as they feel comfortable.
There are times where I'll do sometimes just a matter of modeling, or even with my own breath. I'll slow down my breath, and it almost is like contagious, and everybody around will mimic my slowing down of breathing. And sometimes I have to give a verbal cue to the people that are around me and say, well, if I've asked a question, or I'm just being with the other person, I'll say something like, well, we will be here in case you want to share something. We're going to give you that space and time. Let us, trying to cue to others that we're waiting, and we're going to give that person the time and space. In case that, and that sometimes will trigger or tip the other person to follow. It usually does. I do, it is recorded on Facebook Live. So we will, it is on Facebook on our page for immediate review, and will be on our lives on Facebook to review. And then we will, again, we'll find a way to get this up on our website as well. Wanda, Wanda asked about slide presentations being made available. I should be able to turn this into a PDF and can send it to all of those who attended. Absolutely. Well, if there are no other questions, again, I'm going to put my contact in the chat box, because I know that this, for many of you, this is kind of the start to this conversation with you all. And again, for those who are especially local, we can continue, we can maybe talk about doing demonstrations as examples of this to congregations. That stuff I'm more than willing to do. And for those of you who are from afar, email me anyway, because I'm more than willing to. If I don't know the answer, I have a library of people who do or can at least help. So I will type in my email address. There it is. And I will send an email out to you all with the PDF version of the PowerPoint. And thank you all so much for joining us. Hopefully I'll see you all our next webinar. Take care.